Hello, humans.
This is Mike and Dave's Multiverse. Welcome to our series of interviews where we share the experiences, stories, and insights of our friends from all walks of life and all corners of this beautiful globe.
We hope you find the conversation interesting, illuminating, and uplifting. The goal of our channel is to bring people together, so please subscribe. And if you enjoyed today's interview, hit the like button and leave us a comment.
Thanks for watching. Hello, humans of the multiverse. We're here for Humans of the Multiverse, episode 4, with my very good friend and mentor, Marilyn Cornell. I worked with her about 10 years ago, and it was a wonderful experience for me. I'm just going to tell a quick story about how the first time I met Marilyn, and then I'm going to pass it off to her. But I moved to San Diego from South Dakota. And I didn't know what to expect or what I was getting myself into. I was going to be going to grad school, and I had to go down to this place called Veterans Village of San Diego to interview for my internship. And I hadn't been to a single class yet or anything. And so I go and I meet Marilyn, and she was just the most welcoming and open person. And she was so grateful to have me there. And she really gave me put a lot of trust in me early on. And so she allowed me to come to my first ever, it's what's called the Veteran Stand Down of San Diego, which we're going to talk about later. But I showed up at this thing, and it looks like literally Woodstock for veterans. And she puts me in a tent full of combat veterans and says, "Here, you're in charge of this tent." And I'm like, "I am." Cool. And she just let me run right out of the gate with that job and gave me a bunch of responsibilities and really instilled a lot of trust in me, and it really built me up. And I really appreciate that. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have her on, but also because I just think she's had a fascinating career, a fascinating life. And so without further ado, and less me talking and more Marilyn, if you wouldn't mind just kind of taking it from the top, like where are you from, and take us from there.
Okay, so I'm a native San Diegan, born here, and went to high school here, and then went off to college in Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara. It was far enough away that I wasn't expected home on weekends, and but close enough if I got into trouble, which on occasion I did. But
I couldn't imagine.
Oh no, I did. Yeah, flunked out after the first year and had to pick up some classes and go back. So I think that was a good lesson for me, in that nothing is always going to run smoothly in your life, nor in other people's lives. So I consider it sort of building compassion and humility over the years, which is fine. So graduated from college, and my roommate and I moved to San Francisco. We could hardly wait to get to the big city. And my best career, I think, in my early career was as a waitress all through college. And went to college on VA benefits because my dad died when I was 14. So veterans have always sort of been in and out of my life from an early age, I think. So lived in San Francisco, got a great job as a waitress, but it wasn't enough. So found a job as a social worker. And in those days, if you could walk and chew gum at the same time, they were desperate to have you. So I worked in East Oakland, which is a pretty rough neighborhood. And here I am driving my Volkswagen bus, my little Volkswagen Beetle across the bay, in my first grown-up job as a civil servant. And it was amazing. It opened my eyes to not everybody lives the same life I lived, which wasn't a life of privilege. But in any case, I learned so much from the people that I was serving that I think it was some good lessons. I had one woman I remember distinctly. She said, "Well, I'm going to do some cooking while you're here interviewing me for my renewal." And she told me how to make 4 meals for herself and her 3 kids, last 4 days out of 1 chicken. I'll never forget her. Claretha Thomas is her name. And for some reason, that woman has been kind of a real role model for me about making do, and that, you do the best you can. So she was an inspiration.
Was that the biggest lesson you took from her?
Well, there were lots of lessons. Yeah, I mean, my job there was to help her get through the system and support her family. And this was the late '60s. It was also I was a freshman in college. This will tell you how old I am. So I was a freshman in college when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I was a social worker in East Oakland, which is a predominantly Black community, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and then again when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated a couple of months later. So it was a pretty tumultuous time. I went through Vietnam and all of that. So I'm a child of the '60s in some respects, and it was growing up pretty fast, I think.
It
But
sounds
go ahead. I don't need to ramble, so stop me if you have another question, please.
I like you rambling, but I did want to ask, like, so did you have a hippie phase during that time?
Well, I must admit, we lived in Haight-Ashbury, but it was, we didn't go there to be hippies. We went there because we wanted a larger city, and we loved San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the cheapest place to live. So my roommate and I had a big flat, and we painted it. And I remember we got up our courage to ask the landlord if we could have cats, and he said, "I don't care if you have a chimpanzee." So it was a pretty freewheeling place.
This is the same woman you're still friends with today, right? You were just visiting her?
I just visited her. Yeah, I was bridesmaid at her wedding. We've been friends for 65 years. So,
Cool.
yeah, I'm not that old, but I'm old.
So was that before social work was like a degree? Because I'm a social worker, but you said they were literally take anyone who could chew bubble gum.
Pretty much. Well, it was a social work degree. I had a degree in sociology.
Okay.
And I was always more interested in the big picture, like society at large. And I'm not science. I became a therapist because, I don't do math well at all. So it was a perfect career for me, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I say that all the time too. Like I became a therapist because I don't do math well. But the truth is I became a therapist because I like people and I like, helping people. And I think that's probably true for you too, huh?
It is. And as you know, I spent a lot of years, over 35 years, doing clinical supervision. And I think that was one of the highlights of my career before I retired, is all of the interns and trainees that I supervised. They kept me humble. And none of us are experts on other people, really. Mm-hmm. So I always enjoyed learning from you as much as you might have learned from me.
Yeah, well, that's nice to hear, because like at 35 years of, doing that and being a clinical supervisor, you must have had a lot of interns. So I just grateful that you remember me as one of your faves.
You're one of my faves, Dave. Absolutely.
I appreciate that. So how did you, Mike had some questions about the, what is it called again? Hold on, mitigation specialist for capital cases. How did you go from doing that to doing that?
Well, when I left San Francisco, I actually married, I reconnected with a guy I'd worked with in the summertime as a camp counselor every year. Mm-hmm. And he was up there on a Coast Guard Reserve summer camp thing, or his, whatever it was he had to do. I can't remember, his yearly activation thing. So I came home, we got married, lived on a sailboat for a year, and worked up in the mountains at the same time. And then I really needed to get a real job. He went back and got his master's and started doing teaching. And I applied for a job. The social worker list was long, but they were hiring for probation officers, which paid more. So I thought, what the hey, I'll just do that as well. It's pretty similar, only, maybe a different clientele in some respects. So I started as a probation officer, worked in an institution with children, and then moved up to the field services with juveniles, and then later with adults. And I really like the work. It seems like I work with a lot of, as you know, VVSD, Veterans Village of San Diego, was working with homeless veterans with substance use and trauma, and 90% of them were on probation or parole. But I kind of like that population. I never really wanted to sit in a fancy office and charge $300 an hour to hear somebody talk about their problems. It didn't seem to me to be making much of an effort to do anything or improve anything. So, but I liked being a probation officer. I liked my clients. I liked seeing people change and get clean and sober, for one thing, or get job training and move on. So working with that criminal justice population put me in a community where I was in court a lot, and I met a lot of attorneys. And there was one woman attorney. She was a criminal defense attorney. And later on, we became friends because we actually had some clients in common that I supervised. And she later came to me after I was working as an intern myself before I was licensed. And she said, I've got this guy with a double death penalty cases, 2 murder cases that were going at the same time. And she said, I need some help. He's acting out in jail and the trial's, months away. Can you help me? Would you consider going down? I've been in and out of jail seeing people as a probation officer for years. So I said, well, sure, I'll help you out. So that's how I started, going down every Saturday and sitting with him and making sure he didn't act out and trying to get him to talk, which he didn't want to do. He sent me away first after the first couple of visits and said, nah, I don't want to see you. Then asked for me to come back. So that case I followed through and testified, did some mitigation work. I talked to family members. And because it's not so much a whodunit, but a whydunit.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, you need to know where somebody's come from and what are their experiences and what they've seen and what they've done to really evaluate them and to know them. So that was my job. Because I was a therapist, I think I had a talent for interviewing people and listening.
Sure.
So that's how I got started, and then went on from there. And I was hired. I was sort of my specialty, people in jail, and it turned out to be most of them were in for murder. So a lot of therapists would never want to go into a jail or a prison, but it didn't bother me. And I found that talking to people late at night in a prison, you get a lot of information. It's pretty interesting.
How many of those cases do you think you've worked on over the years?
Well, probably close to 50. Death penalty cases, it's about, I think it's around 15 to 20.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's for most people, when you tell them like that they would have to do that for a job, they would not want to do that for a job. They'd be scared. And I always wanted to ask you, and this is my first time asking, were you scared in there at all talking to them?
No, because if they're in there for a serious case, for a homicide, we're between glass.
Okay.
There were times that I was in the same room, actually with the worst guy. I was in a large room, interview room, and there was no glass between us, and we just sat in chairs. But usually they're like up at San Quentin's death row. When I go up to interview them, they're locked down. They have shackles on their arms, which are shackled to the chair, and then the chair's, bolted to the ground, and their legs are shackled to the bottom of the chair. So I don't feel a problem. It's not a problem.
Okay. I feel like, you feel physically safe, but I can imagine people would feel emotionally like threatened or something. I mean, I'm just imagining, because you said the worst, what about that one? Were you in fear there?
I saw, he was a serial killer, and the first murder that they think he committed was in San Francisco. But they held back prosecuting it because they wanted to have a case in case appeals came through and for some reason something happened. It was like their insurance policy. But the first time I met him, I walked into the county jail in San Francisco, which was, there was a room, and he said, "How are you? Nice to meet you. And how was your flight? And let me get you a chair." So it wasn't a problem, but...
Are we allowed to ask who we're talking about?
Yeah, that was Richard Ramirez.
Okay.
Yeah. So
that was the most famous one that you worked on, and the worst one.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, in terms of the number of murders, I think it was 12 or 13. So,
Right, right. And I don't want to sensationalize him in any way, but I wanted to ask, like you, uh, is there any specific memories from that time? It must have been kind of a wild time because it was such a media frenzy, and here you are sitting there. What do you remember? What stands out to you about that time? Not about him necessarily, but just about what was going on.
well, there's sort of two processes. Somebody is charged, and then they go to trial. And if it's a death penalty case, there's two parts to the trial. There's the guilt phase, and then there's the penalty phase. He had already been convicted of the first phase, and he had already been convicted of the second phase. So I was not working. I was actually working on the appeal.
Okay.
So I wasn't. It wasn't the height of it. Was afterwards. I mean,
Okay.
he's, certainly a household name in California, but the penalty phase is the mitigation specialist that Mike was asking about, and that after the conviction and the sentence to death, there's also an automatic appeal. So most of the cases I did, some were at the time of trial where I testified at the penalty phase, and mitigation is gathering facts. You're looking at a lot of records, you're meeting family members, you're interviewing them, you're going over everything in the case, on the guilt and the family side. And you're trying to sort of put a picture together, dare I say a genogram, but a really extensive picture of who this person is and what are all the extenuating factors. And some of them, as our research and our information in this field grows about trauma, certainly OEF, OIF veterans have added an awful lot to the whole research and science behind PTSD and trauma and everything else in the brain and brain injury. And so we look at things a little bit differently. So there's a lot of things that have been come to light, I think, in the time that I've been doing it. I mean, the first death penalty case was 1989. So, and all the way up now. Yeah, so that's a long time.
What's changed? What's been the thing that's changed the most that's made it different?
I think people are now starting to understand trauma and its effect on the human body and the human mind and the psyche and your emotional, and how it ties to any trauma that you experienced when you were growing up or accidents. So a lot of that, I think, gets tied together.
Yeah, and then you're painting the full picture instead of everyone just looking at here's this evil person and what they did kind of thing.
Right. And on the death penalty appeal cases, I've gone all over the country interviewing family members. And of course, they want to give you the picture of what a wonderful person they are. And there's, what somebody does and who they are, two different things. There's the person and the behavior. And sometimes the cosmos lines up wrong for things to come together where somebody does something out of character. But when you start picking the pieces apart a little bit, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. And then you put them all together. And so it's not evil versus good. It's sort of how did we get there? What was happening at the moment that occurred? So
yeah,
it's with everybody and talking to people and finding out about that.
So it sounds like you like the investigative aspect of that a lot too, huh? And putting the picture together.
I do. I like the tying it all up, and it's really putting the pieces together in a way that the average person can understand it, because it's not just, oh, they're a terrible person, they're awful, and which what they did is, and they maybe have been an awful person for a long time too, but I think that there's also more to it than we understand. So there's one case that they have gone back. He was you go through a state appellate process and then a federal appellate process. And in the federal appellate process, it was a case out of Sacramento, and he was a Vietnam vet. And so my job there was to look at his life from birth up until he went into the military. Interesting thing was he went to Vietnam and was in an important battle and received a Bronze Star. But he was homeless, and the murder was the homeless of another homeless individual over a car. So to explain that was important to me. And I didn't go back to court. I was deposed by the federal prosecutor for hours explaining, and he came from a very poor family in Missouri, and near I think it's the Arkansas-Missouri border, and grew up in a holler with 11 or 12 siblings and no money and things. And so understanding, but he really distinguished himself when he went into the military. And that was important for people to know and understand. And I'm happy to say that they resentenced him. And so his death sentence was reviewed, and it was changed. And so his life without the possibility of parole. So
kind of technically you saved a life there.
Technically, yeah.
That's amazing. And you're absolutely right that you gravitated towards that kind of work, which I find super refreshing and amazing. Because no matter how many people you had interviewed on a psychiatrist's couch, charging them however much money they were willing to pay, you would have never been able to make that type of impact from however many people were in that type of scenario.
And Mike, the people have had an impact on me too. You get to know them. Some of these folks, I've been interviewing them and keeping in touch with them. I have a woman who killed her 4 children, her 4 sons, and then turned the gun on herself, intending to commit suicide. When she was at the hospital, they managed to save her life. They knew her because she used to work at the hospital. And of course, you can imagine everybody thinking she's the worst woman in the world, including the judge at her sentencing. And I was supposed to testify in the penalty phase, but the defense attorneys decided not to do that. They didn't want to open things up. They didn't have a lot of courage. But anyway, and she and I have kept in touch for 25 years. And October 4th, she was resentenced because the judge had finally paid attention to some of the research about what's called maternal filicide. It's an altruistic filicide, because she had been a very damaged child and very abused. And she knew that abused, motherless children didn't do well in the world. So when she was depressed and beyond her limits, she knew she had to take her children with her when she committed.
Wow.
So it was an act of love, not an act of hate. And the judge, 25 years later, the same judge that sentenced her, and I was at the sentencing hearing, and the judge was just reviling her, and it was painful to hear. And of course, the family of other family members, and it was horrible. And so the same judge resentenced her, set aside the death penalty, and resentenced her to life without the possibility of parole, and thanked me for the work that I'd done on the case.
Wow, the same judge, you said?
The same judge changed her mind because she learned, because over the years, the 25 years. So I don't know. You just keep working. You just keep going.
So with that story, I think I know. So there's probably literally YouTube videos and documentaries about that particular one. I'm not going to ask about it, but what I would ask is, like, in the moment when you get when you find out that they changed the verdict, what emotions do you feel in that? Like, is it relief? Is it, I don't know, pride? Or I don't know.
It's not pride. I'm relieved because for several people, I've been asked to promise that if they're executed, that I be at the execution, which I really don't want to do. I don't ever want to have to do that. So in that way, I'm relieved, but I'm relieved for them, because having a death sentence over your head is different. Life without the possibility of parole, they'll never be out. But the woman, I liked her so much. She was from Texas, and she said, "Marilyn, if I was on the jury, I'd give me the death penalty." And she was a pretty straight talking person. And now she's walking more freely around the prison. She's able to be treated like another inmate. And so I think that her life has improved. I think the judge has learned compassion. And I think that people, a reporter did a story in the paper and explained it, which was good after they resentenced her, because it was a pretty well-known case here in San Diego. So, and I'm glad they explained the reasons why.
Yeah, and a lot of times what people are watching in their true crime documentaries and things like that, it's just this sensationalized part of these cases and focusing on the act and the, that kind of thing. And it sounds like your job is to focus on everything else. That I think it gave you kind of a superpower of compassion in a way, because most people just hear that story, killed her 4 sons and killed herself, and then that's it. They just write that person off. And I always admired that about you, Marilyn.
Well, thanks. Being at VVSD was my dream job. You know that, don't you?
I do, yeah. Nobody loved that more than you.
Nobody loved that more than I did. It was really hard. I had to drag myself out of there. Yeah. It was, but the veteran aspect, I mean, there are no in my mind, there are no finer human beings than veterans. So I felt so fortunate to be able to be there as a civilian and watch some of those miracles happen at VVSD. That was incredible.
I feel super fortunate just in the time I was there to see that as well and kind of just play a small role in that. Would you mind telling us how that got started, Veterans Village of San Diego, how you got started in it, and kind of take us from there?
Sure. So VVSD, it used to be Veterans Village, Vietnam Veterans of San Diego, was an organization started by 5 Vietnam combat veterans. And one of them is still living and is in San Diego and very active in the veteran community. His name is Jack Lyon.
I know him.
He's an icon. He's just an icon. It's an honor to be one of his friends. So they started VVSD, and this was before PTSD was diagnosed in the DSM. So they knew what they'd gone through. They knew what they needed, and they all needed to get clean and sober. And they said, there's nothing here for veterans. You go to an AA meeting or an NA meeting, and they didn't really understand. So they started Triple Threat. I don't know if you remember Triple Threat.
I think so.
It's a recovery meeting and the triple threat of alcohol, drugs, and combat. Right. So they started that and built in the community, and then decided they wanted to start an organization to help veterans, a treatment center. So they started out with 44 beds kind of in the bowels of downtown San Diego, which wasn't all gentrified at that time. And they got some pretty rough people. Most of them came out of jail or prison. And they just started doing what they thought would be good, and started with recovery, and then thought, well, you guys need to get jobs too. They had a little bit of seed money from the mayor of San Diego, who had served in the Marine Corps. And they just got started. And little by little, they built this into the nation's finest treatment program for veterans. There is no doubt, really. And then they grew, and successive CEOs got money and expanded it until we had a beautiful facility of serving them, had 224 beds, and we added on at the outside of it with sort of transitional apartments where veterans could go from that to, integrating back into the community. And then in 1988, they decided that there were a whole lot of veterans out on the street that weren't getting help. So they needed to do an outreach. So 2 veterans, Vietnam veterans, Robert Van Kuren, who lives in upstate New York, and John Natchison, who later became a clinical psychologist, they were, I think, floating down the river one time between California and Arizona. And they were floating down the river, and they thought that they needed to do something. They said, well, why don't we just have something where we have everything instead of people having to go different places to get their services. So that's kind of how it started. The first time was in 1988, and it was kind of a picnic. because all the homeless veterans living in the park and downtown didn't trust him. They thought it was a sting.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to do outreach. They had to send these great, tough guys out crawling around the bushes and saying, get out here, get your ass out here. I got something for you. Oh yeah, I'm not going anywhere with you. And they'd have cartons of cigarettes, and that attracted people. And they had buckets of fried chicken. So they finally got a handful of people. And coincidentally, Dr. John Natchison was one of my instructors in graduate school at the time. And so the next year, in 1989, the second year, he said, you all have to help me, because we're going to put tents up and we're going to make this a real thing. So I was there in 1989 and went back 33 years later every year. So it's was my favorite 3 days of the year.
Yeah.
Surpasses Christmas and everything else.
I remember my first one and seeing you there just kind of running the show, but like everyone was like, you had everyone like doing everything, but you were also running around like crazy. And it was a really fun experience for me too. I had a blast that weekend, and I still have pictures and that kind of thing. And it was what I found so cool was that there was veterans coming from other states, veterans coming from San Francisco all the way down to San Diego, thousands of people. Where they could get haircuts, clothes, massages, medical treatment, dental stuff. It was, and also there was like entertainment and everything. It was wow. That was like my first experience working with Marilyn and working in San Diego was a blast like that.
It's a great experience, and I liked the fact that we had them for 3 days, which was the perfect amount of time. They came in on a Friday morning at 6 a.m. Gates opened, and they were gone by usually 2 or 3 in the afternoon on Sunday. But we really worked on those people in those small tents where you were with the combat vets, to work on them, to invite them to come to treatment.
Yeah.
And to get off the street and not make that a lifestyle, and take advantage of the services that they had at VVSD. And there are some people now who are over 20 years clean and sober because they got clean and sober at Stand Down. Or one guy I worked on for 17 years, and he finally went into treatment, and now he's 8 years clean and sober. I mean, that's just amazing to me.
Yeah. I can see the joy that you have.
Yeah, I love them. Yes, it's a family. It's a family. So.
Well, there are clients I had that I occasionally stay in touch with that are still clean and sober. You probably know exactly who I'm talking about, a couple of them anyway.
Yes.
And that's a joy to me too, because it's not like I did anything. I feel like I was just there, and they did all the work. But the Stand Down, are they still doing Stand Down?
Well, I don't know if I mentioned this in a text. I think I did, but unfortunately, VVSD has fallen on hard times.
Oh no.
Yes, in 2020, right, during COVID, the prior CEO, all of whom the CEOs from day one going forward have all been veterans, former military. But unfortunately, they hired a female. There's nothing wrong. She is a female, but she's not a veteran. She's the first civilian, and she'll probably sue me for some of this stuff. So you might need to take some of it out.
Edit out her name or something.
No, I'm not going to give you her name, but I certainly you could Google it and find out. But she's destroyed it. So she's destroyed Stand Down, and she's destroyed VVSD. They lost their license as a state licensed alcohol and drug treatment facility due to her incompetence and malfeasance. And they've also, Stand Down has dwindled down to where they no longer were able to go to the school. So they were going to a parking lot at the swap meet one year. Another year they went to a middle school, kind of on the tennis courts, the asphalt tennis courts. And last year they were down into with some church where there's no parking, and it was it's pretty sad. It's just really dwindled down, and we're trying really hard, Jack Lyon, and there's a group of us, sort of we're the insurgents, and we're trying to get something going to revive it. All we need is money,
Right. I
Know anybody with a lot of money?
just
Let
knew
us.
you couldn't stay retired forever, Marilyn.
Well, I wouldn't run it. It's your generation needs to take it over.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting because it's a different generation of like service members, with a different set of challenges, and I
Yeah.
don't think they've organized themselves as well as the veterans of Vietnam did after the war. So I wonder. I'm hoping that our generation does pick that up because 35 years of running that place, there must have been thousands of veterans came through there, right? Do you have any idea?
Oh, hard to say. Yeah, it's really hard to say between that and stand down. I think I think the highest number we had for a stand down was 1,300 veterans in
Wow.
one place. Yeah, for three
Sounds like
days.
it sounds like it was in the community for too long and served too many. The needs of too many people to simply go away quietly like that. So maybe with the right folks in position, we can get it back
People
going.
loved, yeah, and Mike, the community, even if they did nothing else, many of them showed up at stand down to help. We had 4,000 veterans over those 3 days.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they loved it. I always said it was a cross between Woodstock and a family reunion. So
It started the beginning of the most exciting, most like challenging year of my life. I mean that honestly, like, because I've been to war and like, I thought
right.
there was just so much going on that year between, like I was doing an internship there, but you also had me at 2 different horse ranches, and I was dropping people off at the aquatic massage therapy thing, and I was coordinating that, and I was working with the combat veterans, and I had a blast. But at the end of it, I was like, "Oh, I'm exhausted." But it was the time of my life, and I just always wanted to thank you for, trusting in me and giving me all those opportunities. I wanted to ask, like, rewind a little bit, like, to the beginnings of Veterans Village. Like, how did you get involved with Veterans Village?
Oh, that's right. So, well, I got involved in that through stand down. So in '89, when John Natchison said, um, you students need to help. So I said, well, that sounds pretty interesting. I will. So I did it, and I had my tent the first year. I was thrown into a tent, but the first year we didn't. I mean, this was the second year. We didn't really know exactly what we. Huh?
That's how you did.
Exactly, just like you.
That's funny.
And I had one of the residents who was currently at VVSD as a participant. He was a veteran there in the program, and so he kind of helped me. But he was sort of, nobody really knew what to do. We were finding our way. They forgot to turn off the sprinklers in the middle of the night on the field. It's a baseball field. And so everything was wet, and then somebody came and wanted to cook dinner for everybody and brought, I don't know how many hundreds of chickens, but he didn't get started until 7, and I think they ate dinner at 10 o'clock at night. It was kind of a cluster. So, but we loved it, and we would tell stories about it, and I just remember I still have. There was a big article in the newspaper on that Sunday morning, and I took it I bought a newspaper and showed it to the guys at the tent. I said, "Look, you're famous. Look at the stand down," and they all signed that paper. I have that from 1989. I saved it, and I left that field thinking, "Oh my God, what was the number of that truck that just ran over me?" I couldn't believe the emotion and the connection in 3 days that people could have with each other for good. It was amazing.
That was the experience I had at Stand Down as well. So
Yeah.
I remember like getting home, like, oh my gosh, like you described it perfectly. The way I would describe it was I was exhausted afterwards, but in a good way.
Yeah.
And you became the clinical director of Veterans Village after that?
Well, I always wanted to work there, but I needed to get licensed, and I was a probation officer then in 1989. So I needed to establish myself and get a private practice, and So then finally, when the opportunity came about was in 2007, and they had asked me to fill in as a supervisor a few times, but I was still going to stand down every year and thinking, I said to myself, I'm going to work here one day. One day I want to work here, so I did. When the previous clinical director retired, after she was there, I think about 10 years. And so I was time. I was ready to do that and to give up my private practice. And so I thought, okay, now's the time.
So you set the intention. You were like, I
I
want to
did.
do this. And then you did.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. All the biggest things I've done in my life were similar. I just had it in my head that that's what I wanted to do. And one of them was to go to University of Southern California, which is how I ended up meeting you. So I just always think every time I get that voice, I always try to follow it. That's kind of how this podcast started too.
Right.
I've been thinking about it for a while, and it's about setting intentions, right? So 35 years working with homeless veterans, the triple threat, right? Is there any? I know it was 35 years, but is there any like standout lessons or experiences you had besides stand down working there?
Well, gosh, there were some incredible opportunities. I think there's stories that go. I kept a list on my phone of stories from stand down, things that happened. We had several marriages there.
Sounds like Woodstock.
People wanted to get married. One of us was a former intern. She got married there. She loved it so much. I think the other interesting thing that came out of it is that we all worked together to have a veterans treatment court in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that?
I do, yes.
Yeah, and that's still going on, and it's a wonderful experience, and they're doing really great things. And the other part of it is that we put together a domestic violence treatment program for combat veterans that's run out of the vet center.
Okay.
So things have spawned from a lot of the work that was done at Stand Down and also at BBSD.
Yeah, that has to have been one of the first veterans courts. For those who don't know, a veterans court, for our audience, a veterans court is a prison sentence diversion program for veterans with substance use or mental health issues related to the military. And I'm not going to say where or what county, but I had to do a veterans court, and it saved my life. It actually wasn't a veterans court. It was a mental health court that got turned into a veterans court because of how well I did. But I'm not going to say which one it is. And so I just think that's so cool how the connection that goes from, you guys starting Stand Down and Veterans Villages there, and they started that, and then it spawns, right? And now there's, there's a Stand Down here in Atlanta. It's small, but they do it here. And now there's, so much so that veterans courts spread across the country and ended up impacting me, 30 years later. I just think that's really cool. So that's exciting.
Yeah. Stand Down, I think, went on to over 200 cities after it started in San Diego. That was the first Stand Down, the first ever. And I remember in the early years of Stand Down, we used to have forward observers from lots of veterans organizations across the country. I remember for a couple of years there was Boston and Buffalo, New York. People came down and they had a notebook and they watched and took notes. And Darcy put together a manual that people could take back to their own community and tailor it to whatever their needs are or their locations So it's nice to see that from the work that was done, that good things have spread across the country for veterans. It's really important.
Yeah,
sounds like it had a ripple effect spreading to so many different cities. That's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
I think what some of the themes of what you're talking about here is like growth. Like our knowledge about trauma has grown, our connection, has grown, and so all these networks are now built. It just was a totally different scenario, in the 1960s, right? in many ways, our veterans nowadays have a lot more like available to them, but I feel for some reason that they're a lot less connected.
That's what I've been wondering. What are the differences in the needs of the veteran population today versus 30 years ago, the needs, and then versus what's available to them?
That's a great question, Mike, and one that we struggled with at VVSD. So I got there in 2007, and that were the first folks from Iraq and Afghanistan were coming home then. I think when I started there was maybe one OIF veteran that had gone through the program. And then it started, then there was a deluge, really, lots of them. And I think that we learned that Vietnam veterans and OIF veterans it's a different animal. And they had different things that they faced, different wars, different conditions, different climate, in the country. And some of the things that had worked, we had to really modify the treatment program for OIF veterans because technology was a big deal. It used to be you couldn't have your phone, you couldn't have your computer and all that stuff. So, but we needed to use those things rather than to not. And so they learned differently. They were out for different things. And a lot of them were not a lot of them didn't really want the substance use treatment, even though they needed it.
Mm-hmm.
But they knew that, to get ahead. And a lot of them were better educated and had already gone through education and had college degrees. And so we had to learn that they could be impatient. Even the treatment programs, Triple Threat, which was started for, combat veterans, we thought, wow, this will be perfect. But I remember when there were two new guys, Sean and Garrett, and they were like the cutting edge. And so they came in together. One was Army and one was Marines. And they bonded together because they were the only two OIF at one point. And they taught us that they needed more physical fitness stuff. They needed to be out doing things. They needed to be lifting weights. They needed to be in a gym. They needed all that stuff to help them. And we sent them to Triple Threat, and they said, this is really nice, but we want our own meeting. So they started a meeting called New Breed Triple Threat.
Mm-hmm.
So things were different. The war was different. They served differently. Weapons were different. Everything was different. So
yeah, I remember at Veterans Village, they weren't segregated, but they were in their own little area and stuff.
Yeah.
Like younger veterans from the older veterans, and there was sometimes a little bit of infighting between.
Yes.
And yeah, I remember that. I remember kind of being in the middle of that a little bit a couple times, but it was interesting to see the difference, like you said, in the needs of the two different populations. And one of the things that stood out to me was that brain injury. A lot of them had brain injuries, and the older veterans did not, because IEDs were a big thing in OIF, and we were wearing armor and we were in up armored trucks. So it's happened to me before. I was knocked completely unconscious by an IED, and that's a lot of us were. And there's lingering effects, especially if it happens multiple times. And we were getting people with brain injuries that were moderate, but then they also had PTSD, and they also had, and then they were expressing all that through substance use and behavior and that kind of thing. And it was a little bit different than the Vietnam guys in that sense. But I fit right in anyway. That's why you threw me into the tent.
Well, I'm a civilian. I didn't serve. So I'm not the expert on anybody's life. And you all needed to, the more combat veterans, to my mind, that were there doing their internships and their traineeships, to me, I would have had just only those. But it's good to put a civilian in once in a while. But I just feel like I'm not the expert in anybody's life, and they can tell me what they need. And I think that most therapists need to learn that you're not in charge. It's, you're not the be all and end all. And I also felt that it was sort of my philosophy was get you started. Don't sit around being anxious. Just do it. And if it doesn't work out, do something else. Because it's sort of they accuse me of having a sink or swim school, but I didn't have time to hold a lot of hands necessarily. But I felt like you went into war. You can do
Right.
this. Grief.
Yeah. I only had the chance to have imposter syndrome for about 5 minutes. And then, all
I
right.
know it's a terrible thing to have.
Basically on the drive home, and then I was like, okay, I can do this. And I feel like I did a good job. And you mentioned that one of the things that you enjoyed the most, if not the thing you enjoyed the most, was the interns, and that you learned so much from interns.
Right.
Was that because you were just getting so many interns from so many different walks of life and different schools and different parts of the country and stuff like that? Or
Well, yeah, that's kind of part of it. I mean, I just enjoyed watching all of you not need me. I mean, gain confidence and find your own way. I mean, my style is a little bit more direct, I think, than some. We've had people with, doing therapy with photography. That was part of there were people who were doing art with their therapy. Everything works, whatever works. And it's up to the person you're working with to tell you what works and what doesn't work. So I think you learn as much from your clients as you do from, actually you learn nothing in graduate school. So
that's true.
I shouldn't say that, but I just think you don't. I think you need to learn from doing, and you need to learn from your mistakes, and you need to be human, and you're not really better than your clients at all. You're there, hopefully you can do something right.
I'm going to take that quote. Actually, I like that a lot. I struggle with that even today with my clients. Is like, I want to be like, this is what I would do if I was you. And so that's exactly what you should do as well. And I fight that all the time. So, but you're right. We're not the expert of somebody else's life. We're not in charge, and listening and hearing them say what they need is really, when you break it down, it's building that rapport so that they will tell you what they need. And then that's it. That's the job, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, you work yourself out of a job, really.
Yeah, you will. You will. I just at where I work now, people will come through as interns, and they can't build a rapport or anything like that. Their clients will let them know by not rebooking with them, and then they'll be gone.
Yeah, pay attention to what how they're responding to you.
Yep.
Ask them what they need. Ask them what they want. It's a revolutionary kind of thing.
Imagine that, right?
Imagine that. Yeah. I
just find that like, I know that what brings you the most joy is the veteran stuff, and I wanted to give you a stage to do that, like as you do so well. But I'm also super fascinated with the other parts. So the question I had was with true crime, there's a million YouTube channels. They got a documentary. It comes out yearly for all these famous, infamous serial killers. Famous is the wrong word. It seems like a never-ending sensationalization of these cases. And I always wanted to ask you, how do you feel about that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think it's too simplistic. It's good and bad, evil and angelic. It's sort of, these cases are complex, and there's really no simple answer to understanding human behavior. I mean, I don't understand them sometimes, and so when I would go on an appeal case, so I'm the mitigation specialist, and my job is to fly into town, make an appointment with the family, and talk to as many family members as possible. And as I said, they really want to talk about how good, it's usually males, mostly males, how they were in school and the good things about them, and And I know there are good things about them. My job, unfortunately, was to be able to find out what went wrong and how bad were you as the parent and how bad. So here I'm supposed to come in and get their trust and be compassionate and understanding, and then also try to get them to admit that, yeah, I did beat the hell out of my kid and I did do this. And yes, these are the things that were going on at the time. And there's a sort of an epidemiological aspect to it about generational trauma that goes down from trauma to trauma through the generations, and
Sure.
putting the big picture together. And sometimes people don't want to see that. Sometimes it sits close to home. It's like, well, I had trauma and I didn't go out and kill anybody. So it's hard to say, well, how one person makes that decision. So I think a lot of the, Dateline, 48 hours, things like that, it's good. And they're primarily from the victim's perspective, which is certainly something that needs to be, they're always heartbreaking. It's usually some young college student who gets strangled someplace. And
Sure.
it's so it's more complex than that. So the problem for me is that people are not willing to look beyond the headlines to find out why, what's going on. Is there something we need to change or address as a society?
Yeah.
About violence and about interpersonal violence, about family violence, generational violence, and how does the society address all of that?
I mean, not that I'm not expecting you to be able to answer this, but how? Do you have like a, if you were king, what would you change?
Well, I'd probably put way more money into mental health issues. I mean, these are simple answers too, to say, oh, give more money to mental health, but everything now is telehealth. And well, if you're homeless, or if you're somebody with not much of an income, you don't have access to the internet. You can't even do that.
Also, the research on telehealth is not good.
It's not good. I would
Seems
never.
to me like a bit of a gimmick, like sign up for telehealth and I don't know.
Yeah, they advertise it all over YouTube. It's like, it'll be like, here's this episode of 48 Hours, and on our commercial, here's Better Health. Better Help, get your online health. It's like, I don't know.
Well, I think that it's connection, and I think people are not connected.
Yeah.
I think they're not connected to each other, and they're not connected to people who are other than themselves, who are unlike themselves. You don't really gravitate to people who are unlike you. You gravitate more to people who mirror and reflect how you are. This is just a sidebar, and you can take this out. It's not that important. But so I retired in 2021 from BVSD and from everything. And one of the things I'd always wanted to do was to be a master gardener. So I applied. It's really competitive, like 250 people applied for 50 positions. And I was fortunate enough, because they didn't know how old I was. You didn't have to put your birth date down, because they want all this volunteer work out of you for the community. So I went through it and graduated. And as it turns out, I'm hanging out with all the 40 and 50-year-olds, which is fun for me. I guess it's sort of like having interns without having to supervise anybody.
Right.
And there's a whole lot of people that are different lifestyles, because different approaches, different everything. So it's exposing yourself to a whole different world of people who are not in mental health at all. They're not doing any of this stuff. They're not in criminal behavior. They're out there, digging in the garden, which is kind of fun. But we're all sort of strange people who like to, volunteer and don't mind doing it. But I think it's exposing yourself to whole nother groups of people. But if you got to know some of these folks that do these terrible things, nobody really kind of tries to talk about them and what it was like to be them and what was their life like. What makes somebody do that?
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense what you said. It doesn't matter how long a list of good things you can come up with.
Yeah.
What you're really looking for is maybe a fewer number of bad things and say, look, this is why this person acted out this way later on in life. That's what's more important.
Yeah, and it took 25 years too, Mike, for that judge to realize, oh my God, I didn't realize how abused she was. I didn't understand the whole thing about she was subjected to fetal alcohol syndrome because of her mother, the trauma of watching her mother die in a fire. Her mother was in a house fire, and the kids got out, and she and her brother stood there and watched the house burn, and her mother was in there. So it's just, these things people don't understand. It's just so much easier to say good versus bad. You need to die because you did something wrong.
Yeah, I've always felt uncomfortable with the whole idea of it. Are you this only because this is happening right now, and I know you didn't work directly on it? Are you familiar with the Menendez and their
Yes.
appeal? It's kind of a lot. It reminds me of that because the picture of them has changed over 20 something years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of because over time, people are looking at the case in a different way.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me think of anyway. I don't know if I don't really have an opinion on that. Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I don't know them. I've never met them. I think what was interesting is that the district attorney in Los Angeles County who authorized a review and he's the prosecutor.
Mm-hmm.
So they look for a review of the case and finding the evidence that they had talked about being molested by the father, which is a really awful experience.
Yeah.
And so and the mother, by virtue of not doing anything and not intervening, becomes complicit in that.
Mm-hmm.
So here are young boys that are being subjected to this, and they're telling somebody before they even do anything to their parents. So, and that information is really critical because they're not just making up a story 30 years later and saying, oh, this happened and that's why we did it, so let us out, kind of thing.
They hit somebody beforehand.
Yes, they had told a cousin, I think it was, and then there was somebody else later on who said yes, that he had also been molested. So yeah, it's just, there are no easy answers, and people will like easy answers. They want things cut and dried for them,
I think 48 Hours does a good job of cut and drying it sometimes. And I do like that show, but I'm always like, but it's so much more complicated than this while I'm watching.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a lot of people that are being released because of DNA evidence and other things yeah, maybe you were wrong.
Yeah. DNA technology is changing. Also, just investigative practices are much different,
right.
And much more consistent across the board. So that's always interesting because when I watch an old case, it's always, they ignored certain things because they just didn't know. They didn't know, and so I always have the ability to have compassion for like the worst type of people that other people can't. And I can always put myself in those shoes and be like, man, it would suck to be in his situation right now because his life is over. You're watching somebody get sentenced to death, right? Mm-hmm. And I always feel bad in those situations. And I don't know if that's just me or what, but I've noticed that many people are like, yeah, like the pitchforks and the torches, like burn, and I always thought that there was a bigger picture. And it's interesting to hear from you, that your job was to work directly in painting that biggest picture. Now, how did court go? Like, did you always testify? Sometimes you were deposed, sometimes you testified. What was your role in court?
So in court, I had always done a declaration, and which is what you do with an appeal. And with the declaration, you would either be deposed or they would just use your declaration. So in the declaration, it's similar to a court hearing. I mean, you're there and the prosecutor is grilling you on everything that you've written down under penalty of perjury. Mm-hmm. And, they do the same thing to make you try to say something bad, right. But you say, I can't do that. I did not evaluate that information. In court, testifying in the penalty phase, you're under oath and you're doing that with a jury in the room. So you go in, and penalty phase is the second sort of trial within a trial, which all the information is to say, now that you've convicted this person, are you going to impose the death penalty? So I do the same kinds of things that I would do in the appeal, which is talk to all of the parents, talk to the relatives, look at all the school records. And I don't remember if I told you this, but one thing that I always got was the first grade records, and all school records had little pictures of you in first grade. So here's this killer, and his first grade picture, they never have any teeth because they've lost their front teeth.
Sure.
And they're cute as can be. And, how do you go from that to somebody who's on trial for murder that you want to sentence to death? And that always takes my breath away a little bit. So how did this little guy here? So in the penalty phase, you're on trial and you're having to support your information and your opinion and the evidence and what you reviewed and how that relates to what you're saying. So you have to justify it, I guess.
Yeah.
Keep your temper under control and not be an argumentative witness.
I was going to ask about that. So I was going to ask, did you have any issues like keeping your own emotions out of it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes I did.
Are you? So I'm just going to guess you're not in favor of capital punishment?
No, I think it's barbaric.
In all situations?
Yeah, I think we've sort of evolved past that point. I would hope that we have. I mean, and if you look at the countries that still have it, it's not a great selection of countries.
Not a good list.
No, we're not on a good list.
Yeah, and it's.
I understand why people feel that way. I absolutely understand.
I do too, especially in like certain cases.
Yes.
Children,
yes.
And predatory stuff. But I've always felt uncomfortable. It's a difficult.
It's a tricky one to approach, and I do hope that we're evolving past it as a species. And I think as more people pursue meaning over money, as you have, Marilyn, then maybe we'll need less of that. Maybe we'll have less these violent crimes driven by greed and trauma. Will alleviate that. So,
meaning over money, I like it. Yeah. Do you feel like, Marilyn, do you feel like you have anything else you want to share with us? I'm definitely not cutting out the master gardener stuff. Except
No, cut that out. You don't have to.
I think it's really cool though, and that you're doing that, and you're kind of still put yourself in a similar situation that you were already doing anyway. You've already got you have a bunch of interns keeping you young, right?
Yeah. Well, it's fun. I mean, we do fun things, So
you guys are gardening what? What exactly are you guys gardening and where?
Well, what we do is we serve the community. So we go out. So like next Saturday, this Saturday, there's a organization in San Diego called the Nice Guys, and they're doing their annual holiday giveaway, and they're having 900 families come, and they're giving them turkeys and food, and they have activities and Santa Claus and all this stuff. And then we have a booth there called Ask a Master Gardener. So people can come and ask us any question that they want, and we help them out with the problem. But we're also giving away seeds, and we have stuff where kids can plant seeds and do things and get them interested in gardening and things like that. So it's a community service, but it's also kind of fun, and you're doing good works at the same time.
Was this on like a whim, or was this the plan? You're planning on doing this when you retired?
Well, I always wanted to, but I applied in the 90s, but I was working full time, and that time it was it's also an elite. It was more of an elitist, people who were retired and had money and could do this. Mm-hmm. So to keep up my insurgent role, I applied to and was the chairman of the new selection committee, selecting the next new class, which was kind of audacious since I'd only been there. I was I was a rookie still. So anyway, but nobody wants to work that hard. So I said, well, I'll take it. And I made sure that we did outreach into all the communities that didn't have master gardeners, but had really good gardeners, but people with not a lot of money. And so I wanted to make sure we spread the word, and so that we had gardeners. And I kind of, put my thumb on the scale a little bit. So, and I have 3 women who are all veterans.
Oh, cool.
Cool. Yeah. And I now want to start a garden for veterans in the community that's open to veterans.
In San Diego?
Yeah. I want to find some land somewhere, and because gardening is very therapeutic, actually.
Yeah, I'm not a gardener, Marilyn, but I do have a blackberry bush and a raspberry bush and a blueberry bush in my backyard.
See?
And just getting in there and taking care of them, is very relaxing for me. And I don't do it as often as I should, but when I do, it's nice. I found that, like you mentioned, with the new generation of veterans, you said they wanted to be outside, they wanted to be doing something. That's why we had the horse stuff going on. But I like the idea of a veteran garden. So could they come and plant their own stuff? And
Yeah. It's interesting, in Veterans Treatment Court, they had to do 20 hours of community service. I don't know if you did, but they all have to do community service. And I have a plot in our community garden that's nearby. And so I had a number of them come up and help us do some work. So, but I kind of got the idea. But veterans, people heal by being of service to others. I believe that firmly. I think you being at VVSD helped you, and every other combat veteran that came. Then there were a number of them. I don't know if Michael Branch was there with you.
Was there at the same time as
and
me.
Alan Aker.
Yep, I remember too. Yeah.
Alan has his own clinic now.
Where's Mike?
Mike moved just in March. I think he moved to New York State.
I'm going to reach out to him. I haven't talked to
him. Yeah.
But
see, he became the director of the Vet Center.
That's right. Yeah, I knew that. Yeah.
And he left, and Danielle Willenborg, another one of the USC.
I do remember her. Yeah, I know her. I don't know her, but I know her. Yeah.
He's now the director of the Vet Center.
Cool.
So I love having all of you out there doing things.
Mike, you got anything else? Otherwise, I think we can wrap up the interview.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. Thanks for joining us, Marilyn. That was really interesting. We appreciate that, and it's great that you've blessed a lot of people with the work that you've done.
Well, they blessed me, really, actually.
And
the dirty secret is that you get back as much as you, or more than what you give. So I don't think I've done anything that extraordinary, but.
Well, you waited until the very end of the interview to reveal the secret. I think that was good. We had a secret on the show today.
That's what was my takeaway from working with Marilyn. So we get it back. It's not. It's somewhat selfish in a way, but
yes.
But yeah, that's the message of the episode. I think is. And so I really appreciate your time, and please text me if you're ever thinking about me. If I cross your mind, give me a text, because I will, David. Same with you. Yeah, let's keep in touch. I would love to. Okay, and I will definitely reach out next time I'm in San Diego. All right. Thank you so much for being episode number 4, Marilyn. Oh, that's sweet. Thank you. It's been my honor, really. Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care and have a good rest of your day. Yeah, you too. Bye, Mike. Bye, Britt.
Thank you. Bye.
Adios.